Thank you so much for joining us today. And we welcome David. We'll hear a little bit more about him in the next couple of minutes, but I want to do a little plug for our Community social media links. If you could and haven't already, please go ahead and follow us on our social. And the last link is also the website page for Community. I would like to again welcome everyone. We do have microphones muted as you come in. If you have a question, please use the chat box, put it in the chat. We will have plenty of time for question and answer. And if you'd like to introduce yourself or write a message, go ahead and drop that in the chat. We'd love to know who you are, what your position is, what organization you're from, so we can get some good connections going. Important links will be dropped in the chat. As you can see, Sailor's already dropped a couple in. And if you have any, need any tech help, go ahead and chat me or send me an email at shelby@corpevent.com. And I am going to hand it over to Ed, who is going to introduce David.
Thank you, Shelby, and thank you for my team who helped put this together. The marketing team, Megan, Katie, Shelby, Sailor, and everyone else who's association managers, Melody for getting the names together, all that kind of good stuff. So thank you, team, for the support. I first want to just say something about Community and then introduce David. Community is a concept that we, as an association management company, came up with maybe 15 minutes before COVID started. The concept was to be able to do events and education programs and support our clients with some of the events that they're hosting, so we could get notifications out to the CAM community, our client community, about things going on in the industry and different types of areas associated with our organization. So we did have at least one in-person event prior, very successful on communication styles, and then wanted to follow that up with something that had some value for all of our nonprofit clients. And certainly governance is something that is key to the success of all organizations, and something that sometimes is not focused on enough while we're trying to accomplish some of the things we're trying to accomplish with our organization. So David, as president of David Schreier Associates, I'll let him kind of fill in some of the details. I'll just say that we've teamed up over the last 2 years on many clients, and whenever we're in a situation where there's some board development or some capacity building or some fundraising, my first call is to David and bring him in to kind of work with our clients and come up with using the experience and the tools and the resources that are out there to be able to get people going in the right direction. So again, you're not here to hear me talk, but I wanted to thank everyone for being on board. And then David, if you want to kind of take it from there.
Sure. Thank you so much. So before I share my screen, welcome everybody. And let me just do a little adjustment here. We're really proud of our 2-year relationship with Cam and Ed and his whole team. And board development, board education isn't something that most people go to school to learn. You either learn on the job or you don't. And increasingly, we've been asked to provide training on various aspects of good governance. And that's what we're going to cover today. And some of this may be new material for you. Some of it may be a refresher. Hopefully there's something you haven't heard before. We've got 90 minutes total for our session. We may not go that long, but if we do, I've got 3 different sections of material so we can have some Q&A interspersed in between. So it's not just me showing you slides, and we have at least one breakout activity. So we'll try to keep it interesting for everybody. So with that, let me just bring up my slides. And Sailor and Shelby are going to keep an eye on the chat room in case there are questions that I don't see. And everybody got my slideshow up? Yeah, okay. So I think Ed introduced me well enough. I also teach nonprofit governance and management in higher ed. I might add that. And and I'm a meditation / mindfulness instructor. And I would say particularly as a result of COVID, but even beforehand, a lot of nonprofit executive directors were asking me to work with them and their staff on stress de-escalation activities. So that's where that fit into it all. Let me just start you off with this visual. So good board governance is a path, and at the lower end, you can see the traits and qualities of a poorly functioning board, and then it gets better and better as you move up. And normally boards are in different places. They may just be functioning okay with financials, but they're not functioning well with having board members be ambassadors, or they may be doing really responsible work measuring program metrics, but they may not be very good at conducting board business. So this is just something for you to keep in mind and maybe think about your organization and the places you're at, and be thinking about during the course of this session how to move upward and to the right. Crucially, good board governance has to do with the coherence of the board as a group, because there's a dynamic that develops with all the individual personalities and styles and knowledge and experience. And every board member is either contributing to that dynamic or detracting from it. So a good, healthy exchange of ideas and approaches is crucial to the success of a nonprofit. And there's plenty of research that's been done that shows the more engaged and involved boards are, the more successful the nonprofit is. So these bulleted traits down below are some aspects of good board coherence, good board dynamics. And we'll tease some of these out a little bit further as we go along, but let me just name them. So importantly, building trust among members is important to collaborative governance, and good communication builds trust. So whether that's communication in person or virtually or on paper, how are people being heard and how are people given a chance to speak? Second is developing a culture of inquiry, which means asking questions and not just accepting the status quo, but being willing to challenge yourself and your organization a little bit, and being that devil's advocate, being willing to maybe take an unpopular stance. And that kind of leads right into the third bullet point of independent mindedness. We don't want to have just a rubber stamp board. We don't want to have groupthink where people just go along with the strongest voice in the room. We want independent thinkers, alternative views, and it's just like having more diversity in a gene pool for a species of animal. There's more possibility for survival with more different types of genes. Board micromanagement is something that I work with a lot of organizations to try to avoid, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that essentially means trust the staff. And you don't need to worry about what color fabric they decide to get on the office furniture. You need to kind of keep your focus up here. Addressing problems between board members relates to that first bullet point, building trust. And it's not an easy thing to do. We are used to just avoiding someone or avoiding a topic that could create some animosity or get people emotionally worked up. That rarely solves the issues. They just kind of simmer or stew, and then people become factionalized. So skillfully addressing problems when they arise and facilitating some dialogue really makes a difference. And then the final bullet point is welcoming positive dissent. And positive dissent is distinguished from negative dissent because it's not just whining or complaining, but it's respectfully disagreeing. It's respectfully introducing something contrary that might not be popular. And it's important for board members to allow that to happen, to give space for that. Everybody okay so far? Okay. My colleague Sally, who may be on this call, is going to talk much more extensively about the 3 duties of board membership in the second workshop in this 2-part series, which has more of a legal focus. But I at least need to address it minimally here because it's the foundation. The 3 duties are the foundation of good board governance. So the 3 duties are, and these are duties that are recognized by government agencies as kind of the minimum standards for good board behavior. That board members will execute the duty of care, meaning that you will act in good faith on behalf of your organization. You will make the judgments that a reasonable and prudent person would make. And there's recognition that you may not always be right. You may make some really wrong decisions on behalf of your organization. But the point is, if you tried, if you were diligent and looking at the material you needed to look at and having some good, healthy debates, then the court system is willing to give you a pass on it. So it's incumbent on every board member to actively prepare and participate in board meetings to meet this minimum duty requirement. So that's the first duty. Duty of loyalty is the second duty. And this says that a board member will advance the interests of their organization and keep that paramount in their mind. Always the interests of the organization are top. So if there's a potential conflict of interest, if there's self-dealing, this needs to be made transparent or avoided, depending on whether it's conflict of interest or self-dealing. But keeping the people that your organization serves always top of mind, more so than your own particular interests. I think that's fairly well understood. And then the third duty is the duty of obedience. And this refers to the fact that every organization has its own policies and rules and cultures and expected behaviors. And based on what sector you're in, your organization may also have regulations and laws and bylaws it needs to comply with. So this is stipulating that you will obey all of those kinds of dutiful requirements. And while sanctions, criminal and civil sanctions, are rare, I see them happening more and more. And so what this means is, even if your organization has director and officers insurance, which is fairly standard just to protect some of the decision-making and activities of board members, it doesn't protect a board member if board members were aware of things happening that shouldn't have happened. So again, the Attorney General isn't peering under the tent flap of every organization, but every week it seems I read something in the paper about another organization getting into trouble. So those are the 3 duties. Let me just take an interim pause there. If there are any questions or clarity needed on that? Okay. So board members are accountable to a variety of different community stakeholders. And what I mean by accountability is being responsible in representing and acting on behalf of a number of different groups. Because the fact is, if you're a nonprofit board, a nonprofit corporation, essentially what that means is society in general has given you their permission to act on behalf of their interests, and they believe that you will do so wisely and effectively. And so it's incumbent then on boards to be aware of the various stakeholder audiences that maybe they need to pay particular attention to in terms of communication or reporting or engagement. So this is just an assemblage of the very common types of stakeholder groups that are out there. And you can look this over and see if your association has a different set. Certainly your members are stakeholders, volunteers are stakeholders, potentially the people served through your membership. If there's another kind of level of beneficiaries are stakeholders, the community in general, funders and donors to your organization, and even civic leaders who can play a very active part in the work of nonprofit organizations and associations. So not every stakeholder necessarily gets the same treatment as every other. You have to be thoughtful and judicious when you think about what kind of attention is warranted by what kind of stakeholder. But what this means is you need to start paying attention and not just look at board minutes and kind of talk about what the organization is doing, but how are we sharing this information? How are we being open with our financial information? How are we giving updates on what's happening programmatically? Maybe it's how are we letting people know we're having a problem or a challenge and we need their help? Actually, let me just ask, did anybody spot a stakeholder group that they have that isn't up on this list? And you can either put it in chat or you could just unmute, but any other stakeholder groups that I missed this morning that you can think of for your organization? I'm good, but I'm not that good. I know I missed some.
David,
Yeah.
I was what I call the silent or the invisible hand. That quite often you have a let's say a founding organization or even a member or a person that started the organization, and even though they're in the background right now, they wield an extreme amount of influence over the entire organization, even though it's not overt.
Thank you. That's a really important point. And so that is its own stakeholder group. And so that I would also include in that former board members, former trustees, people who have been important to the life of the organization and still may be engaged in some way, but perhaps more invisibly. Thank you. Any other stakeholder groups? And you can go ahead and mute again now. We hear your phone ringing. Okay. So this is who you're accountable to. What are you accountable to them for? Generally, there are 4 main categories of accountability, and we'll tease these out a little bit further, but they are finances, that we will be transparent and open. We will be accurate. If we're required to have an audit based on our size, we'll have an audit, and we'll have responsible parties looking over our finances. This is probably one of the main areas where organizations get into trouble. Governance is another area you're accountable to, and that means choosing the right leadership for the board, for the staff, and making sure the organization's heading in the right direction. And heading in the right direction may be just continuing to do what you've been doing, or it may be, a lot's changed since COVID, and so we need to adjust how we lead and what we do with our organization. And that gets to the third accountability factor, which is performance. So again, you represent society at large, and society at large is entitled to know what results are you achieving at your association. Do you have good strategies that are actually linked to goals and outcomes? Are you looking at the impact that you make, the difference that you make? Is anybody, kind of paying attention to the store? And this is a newer area of focus for boards. Boards didn't spend as much time in the past looking at program outcomes and program performance as they do today. There was always the default, well, we're not the program experts. That's why we hire staff, so we'll trust them. And that's good. You want to do that, but it doesn't let you off the hook as a board. You still need to be mindful and be asking the right questions. And then the fourth main accountability area is accountability for the mission. And this means that you're actually achieving your mission, or you're making strides to achieve that mission. And sometimes missions need to be changed, and that's okay. It just means that whatever you're doing as an organization should be consistent with, and that not in opposition to your mission. But sometimes mission statements are broadened because an organization may take on more. Sometimes they're narrowed. Probably the most clear-cut example of a mission flip was March of Dimes, which for the first 70, 80, 90 years of its existence was just focused on polio. And then polio was largely eradicated, and then they were an organization in search of a mission, and they decided to focus on birth defects, and that's where they are right now. Okay. So let's just spend a little time with this graphic. You remember I said a few minutes ago that you don't want to start getting into choosing the color of the furniture. You want to stay up here. And when I gestured with my hands, it was in reference to this chart. So this is a rule of thumb you can keep in mind. And I know some board members who put this up on their office walls or keep it in their board binder and take it to board meetings. But essentially, the board's realm, its kingdom is above this line that you see bisecting the page. And the board's responsibilities are strategic. And that means you decide on the mission of the organization, you plan the direction, you set policies, you ensure resources are available for the organization, and you monitor results. That's what you set into motion. The staff are below their line, and they are operationally focused. And it's their responsibility that there's a mirror response to the 5 items I just mentioned. So their responsibilities are to make sure they're abiding by the mission, that they're following your direction, that they're enacting your policies, that they're properly utilizing the resources of the organization, and that they're meaningfully reporting to you the results that they're experiencing. So this line is straddled, sometimes uncomfortably, by the executive director or CEO of the organization, because that person needs to be relating to the board up here around strategy and relating to the staff down here around operations. So the executive director needs to move in both worlds. But generally, this is a good, healthy kind of reading for governance behavior. Now, there are some areas like fundraising in particular where board members may get much more down into the weeds and work closely with staff around fundraising strategies or events and activities, and that's fine. But we just want to have the tendency to spring back and ask, am I going too far into operations, and second guess ourselves that way. That's the healthier kind of approach. So let me just pause right here, and I just would like to hear from anybody in the group if this resonates with you in any way, or if for your organization, and we'll keep in confidence what's said on this call just among ourselves. If your organization has run into some problems with kind of crossing these boundaries, let's just kind of share with each other and have this be just a good learning opportunity. And remember to unmute if you feel like sharing. And you could share about a past organization if you want.
Hi, all. This is Shailushi. Hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I am with the Associates Consultants for Nonprofits. Sorry, I'm off camera this morning. But I think I love this distinction. And I think one of the biggest challenges here is when the founder stays on the board afterwards, and then sort of the operational and strategic get really, really mushy, and people can't pull themselves out of the operational. I think the other big challenge is, particularly during that transition, when from a founder to a sort of a more established organization, is when the board members are all sort of rubber stamp board members. And so they don't really do the work. They kind of let the founder run it. And then they're being asked to do a bunch of stuff, and they have no training, no understanding. They're either too much in the weeds or they're like too hands off. So I love this distinction, and I'm really looking forward to hearing sort of how do you enforce this in a way that isn't too heavy-handed, but also really does keep people in the right lane.
Thank you so much. Those are great points. And so you're the second person this morning to mention founders. So let me just address that. I don't know if it's more widespread among the other organizations, but you may have heard the expression founders syndrome, and it's got, you know, more of a slightly pejorative meaning than a positive meaning. But what it refers to is founders who have this entrepreneurial spirit and hoisted up by their own petards the organization and got their friends and colleagues to serve on their board and put all this activity into practice, may have a hard time letting go. And even after they're no longer necessarily the board chairman, still may feel very much like the organization is their child. And organizations are like kids. They hit these growth spurt points, and it could be awkward for a period of time. And organizations often will reach this point in their life cycle where they're kind of moving under their own energy more now. It's not under just the fumes of the founder. And board members realize they have a responsibility to the organization more so than their loyalty and friendship to the board chair. And you know, you might also read in the papers every now and then. I'll try to think of the organization. This was about 2-3 days ago. A board voted out its founder, who put it all together because they just felt he was exerting too much influence at this point in the organization. So you mentioned board governance, founder syndrome, and what was the second point?
They were both related, right? One that sometimes when founders stay on the board, they exert way too much influence on the operational side of things. And the other thing is, like, when that happens, the rest of the board members have never been asked to do real work. They've just sort of been asked to rubber stamp what the founder or the ED is doing. And so then all of a sudden they don't know which, you know, sort of what lane they're supposed to be in. There's a lot of, like I said, they cross over a lot, and they don't, you know, sort of, board members have a tendency to get too involved in the operational work.
Right. So it's incumbent on all of you to go back to your boards and share the information we're covering today. So A, people know what their minimum legal, fiduciary, and ethical responsibilities are, but also B, what does responsible board governance look like? What are the things that we should be paying attention to? Maybe we never asked about these things before, but it's time. Okay. Any other comments, or I'll go on to the next? Okay, and we'll have a little bit more open Q&A time. All right. So let's probe a little bit further into some of the core board responsibilities. So I mentioned board is accountable for the mission, and that includes having a vision for the organization, codifying the values of the organization, and making sure that the mission and these other statements are honest, that they're current, that they're valid, they appropriately refer to the organization, and that they're used as benchmarks to make sure that the organization doesn't experience drift. And organizational drift means, well, the most frequent way I see organizational drift is when money's being dangled from a foundation saying, you know, we'll give you $100,000 if you start a program on pet first aid. And the organization may not have had anything to do with pet first aid, but they love the idea of getting that $100,000. So they'll go ahead and start this initiative, and it works fine for the first year that they have the grant, and then things go off the rails. So, and that was an actual example of an organization I worked with where we were offered a big chunk of money to start a pet first aid program. So making sure the mission is the right mission for today. Another good, healthy behavior for boards is to engage in strategic thinking. And it doesn't say strategic planning, which is also good to do, but strategic thinking is more of a day-to-day, week-to-week kind of a thing. So it should be an ongoing presence at board meetings that you all need to recognize and talk about what's happening in the environment, the the actual environment, the political environment, the funding environment, the workforce environment, what's happening internally with our organization, and ask, well, what does this mean for us 3 years from now, 5 years from now? So I encourage our clients to stop doing report outs at their board meetings of what this department did, what this department did, what this department did. Just put it on paper and email it around to people. Instead, save that 20, 30 minutes just for an open discussion or a strategic discussion on something that can be a very creative and thoughtful interaction. Maybe it's scenario planning. Maybe it is time we merge with another association, or maybe it's time we separate. What would that look like? So whether it's at a committee, whether it's at a board meeting, whether it's a little half-day retreat, this is a good practice to make a regular practice. Okay. I'm keeping an eye on the time because I want to make sure we have you do your exercise. Can I get a thumbs up from the room just if this is okay so far, the pace is going? I can't look at all your faces, so if somebody's nodding off, I won't know. Ensuring effective planning is a basic core responsibility of a board. And normally the boards lead the planning process, and when they're done well, they're done with staff. It shouldn't ever, in my opinion, be the board just doing strategic planning on its own. But then when we do the plan, actually use it, actually have strategies and goals that we look at over the course of the year to see, are our budgets staying in alignment? Is our activity staying in alignment? Because I'm sure most of you have had experience with a strategic plan where you go through all this work, it's written, it's put in a binder up on a shelf, and it rarely gets mentioned except, once a year, people say, well, let's go back and look and see how much we accomplished. I think a plan should be addressed at every board meeting in the following way. Board members should have dashboards, a dashboard report, could be 1 page, could be 2 pages, that hit on the high key metrics of the organization. So you can always have a current snapshot of how we're doing compared to this time last year with the same kind of activity. So that's also planning, and it's important. Okay. Financial oversight, which I mentioned earlier. And this may mean if you don't have board members who understand how to read and prepare financials, understand how to look for problems, then you need to either get board members who have that expertise, or you need to make sure you've got a great relationship with a CPA firm that you're willing to pay for to spend time with you, because you want to make sure safeguards are in place, you've got the right protections to protect the board, protect the staff, protect the program beneficiaries. You want to be on the lookout for any signs of financial trouble. You never want it to be a surprise. You want to know a year in advance, if the trend keeps going, this is what it's going to look like. And of course, make reasonable decisions based on financial information. This is probably the weakest area we've seen with boards because a lot of people aren't comfortable with financials. And so what happens is the finance committees of organizations, by default, maybe we'll have an attorney and then we'll have a couple of people who do finance, for their bread and butter work. And everybody else on the board says they're the experts, we trust them. And phew, thank God I don't have to do it. And I want to encourage you to kind of break that and push your boards to do the following. Ask people who don't know financials and maybe aren't comfortable with it to also serve on the finance committee, because if you can be sure if other people don't understand financials, they're in the same boat with you. So don't just default this to the experts is my point. Everybody needs to do a little cross training in this. Does this make sense? Okay. Ambassadorship is a crucially important activity for board members, and it means being the face of the organization. And ambassadorship has a certain proactive quality to it. So it's not just feeling good about having your name on the letterhead and people can see you're associated with your association, but it's being willing to represent the organization in public at events, helping to raise public awareness in appropriate settings for your organization, and being the ears for the organization as well, and in being able to develop perceptions on how the organization is seen in the community, and what may need to be done to mitigate bad impressions that are held. One of my clients is a youth services organization, and they've got a new management team in place. And one of the first things the new management team asked me to help them do is, let's identify the misperceptions in the community about our organization, because we've had some issues in the last few years. And, you know, if we don't provide the information, people make up their own bad stories. So let's identify all the misperceptions one by one and think about how to address them. So as ambassadors, maybe you're going to be asked to do some fundraising. Maybe it's thank you calls at the end of the year to donors. Maybe it's going with the executive director to a conference, or speaking at Rotary or Kiwanis or some other civic organization. But this is really important for organizations. So every board member needs to find their way and find the best ambassador role for them. Let me just, okay. Couple more, and then I'm going to ask, I think I'm going to break my order and send you into a workshop activity. So heads up, Shelby, in a few minutes, we're going to do the breakout groups, because I just want to make sure people just aren't getting bored sitting in their chairs. Boards are also responsible for making sure that the organization has enough financial resources to do what it wants to do, or if it doesn't, then maybe scale back on activity. And the best way to achieve this is diversifying revenue to the organizations. So maybe some is earned income through courses that you offer and people pay for them. Some are through sponsorships. You're doing a gala and BMO Harris becomes a sponsor. Fundraising, it could be lower fundraising events, smaller fundraising events, or grants from foundations, and then investments if you're fortunate enough to have a portfolio that needs investing. But, you know, think about your association, and if you've got 90% of your eggs in one basket, that may not feel balanced. Okay. So I think we're going to do this. We're going to break you into a few groups, and I want to have you do a little exercise on ambassadorship. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. When you're in the room, and this exercise information, most of it will be in the chat room. So even after you're broken up into your groups, you'll still be able to reference what's going on. So you'll have 4 or 5 people in each of the breakout groups. And what I want to ask you to do just on the fly, and so it's going to be a little harder for the people who go first than maybe for the people who go last, but in groups of 2, pick 2 people at a time. One person asks these questions and the other person answers. And these questions form the core of the case for your organization, the case being what difference you make, why people should care about what you're doing, why you even exist in the first place. And on one hand, they're very simple questions, and on the other hand, you know, they go a little bit deeper. So in pairs, I'd like you to take turns asking, what is your association? What's unique about how you deliver services? What difference do you make? And why should I care? And just feel your way through this conversation. No one's getting graded, but it'll let you all see, boy, is this something that we need to work on more at our board, or did everything come trippingly off my tongue and we've nailed it? So I just want to make sure everybody kind of is somewhat clear on the assignment. Shelby's going to assign you to rooms. There'll be 4 or 5 of you, just using your own leadership powers. Choose the first 2 people and then the second 2 people, and each person asks and gets asked these questions. And I think if we give you 12 minutes, 13 minutes, that'll be enough time. It was great sitting in on all of your conversations. And there was a particular reason I had us go from learning about accountability to stakeholders to doing this exercise on ambassadorship, because you need to be able to reach people at the head and the heart level. The head and the heart level, meaning that certainly you need to be able to talk about the numbers of your organization, numbers of people served, number of this offered, decreases of that occurring. And that's reaching people at the head level. Reaching them at the heart level is talking about lives that have been changed, talking about the actual difference you might make in an individual. You know, let me tell you the story about Ed and what we did to help him out or to help his business out. People want to hear those stories, especially today. The world's gotten to be a really difficult place to be. So anytime we can, you know, rub somebody's heart and awaken something wonderful, it's a good thing. So let's just stay on ambassadorship a little bit more. And I want to just share a couple of other notions with you. So it wouldn't be a David Schreier workshop if I didn't quote Aristotle at least one time, but he had it right in terms of ambassadorship. Wishing to be friends is quick work, but friendship is a slow ripening fruit, meaning we have to build trust so people feel that our organization is where they want to put their money. Our organization is where they want to give their time. And that comes through good communication, good exchange. Ambassadors, as volunteers, play this crucial connection role in the community because, as I shared earlier, not only are you able to conduct the outreach and share all the good news that you're doing, but you allow for feedback to come back the other way. And people want to be seen and heard, and you can help facilitate that and bring back what you hear, the impressions you hear, whether it's after an event or it's at a conference, bring that back and share it with the others. So volunteers have this kind of binding quality between the community and the work of the organization. I'll also add, board members have this unique position that they're in because people like talking to board members, funders and donors and politicians and civic groups, because there's a halo around all of your heads. There's something special about board members. People understand you're in it as a volunteer because you believe in the mission of the organization, you believe in the work. And so you bring this trust, this credibility, this genuineness. You're not paid spokespeople. You're not personally getting anything out of this, but you believe in the work of the organization. And you're able to reach people at the head and the heart level. And I hope I'm not making you uncomfortable, but I just want to share something that Lynn Kopp, that you said in your workout group that just really resonated with me. So at one point in the interviews we just did, Lynn, who's representing the C.J. Young Association, was talking about just some of the bread and butter facts about the organization, some of the things they're doing. And then I or somebody threw out a question that was more like, well, why should we care about Young Institute when there are all these other needs in the community? And at that point, Lynn just shifted from just repeating things that maybe she read somewhere to speaking straight from her heart. I physically watched her whole body soften, and she just was speaking so genuinely about the people that the Young Institute helps and how they help. They go out and help all these other people out there in need. And so you are helping these other groups by helping Young. And it just was so genuine and credible. And it's fantastic. So all of you have those stories as well. So it will be a good exercise to go back to your board and do this kind of role playing a little bit further. I don't want to say it's your elevator pitch. Maybe it is, but you all want to be able to speak informedly and passionately about your organization and reach people at the head and the heart level. So let me just stop sharing for a moment and ask, did anybody want to make any comments about the experience? Was it horrible and awkward, or, you know, helpful in being horrible and awkward? Or did it go well?
I see Mary has hand raised. Mary, you can go ahead and unmute.
I am a member of the Jung Institute of Chicago as well, and I am a colleague of Lynn Kopp, and I would really love for her to tell us what she told all of you, if she doesn't mind.
You need to unmute, Lynn.
Yeah. So Mary, it's good to see you.
Too, Lynn.
Well, should I tell him just the end of what I was saying in terms of what?
Yes, the heartfelt stuff that you
Yeah,
said.
I mean, when analysts are taking their courses and trying to become analysts, the end result is something wonderful, because they can now go out into the world and help the people who need them and who will benefit from them, and who will become different people because of them. And that's the business we're in. And I hesitate to call it a business because it doesn't feel like a business. And the analysts are doing good work and are making a difference in the world.
Thanks, Lynn. We've got a little less than 20 minutes remaining. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about common pitfalls that boards run into when they don't adhere to good governance. And my colleague, Sally, I mentioned at the start of this session, she's going to go deeper on some of the things I just did a flyby of. I know she's going to also be sharing some examples of when things go awry. Why did that happen? But I'm going to be talking about pitfalls that are fairly general. So one is veering off the mission. The importance of being in alignment with what your mission statement says. And I'm sharing actual examples with you in the blue at the bottom of each slide. There was an educational organization that was focused on young kids, K-8, and they had a lot of money dangled in front of them to build a sports facility, not just for the kids that they serve, but everybody in the community. People of all ages could come by, and the community wanted that, and everybody loved the idea, but it was mission drift. That's not what they were in business to do. What do they know about running programs where seniors can come and do, you know, Zumba classes in the swimming pool? So staying true to your mission and staying on the mission is one common pitfall. Another is complacency. And this refers to the importance of board members actively participating in meetings, knowing their responsibilities, and reading the work and asking the questions and attending to what needs to happen. And the example I gave is the one we talked about for a few minutes earlier. If it was an organization where a board member didn't know how to read the monthly financials, and he was too embarrassed to say anything about it, so he just voted yes every time there was a motion to approve the financials, and didn't ask any questions. And he felt really chagrined about it. He knew it wasn't right, but the organization didn't offer a financial literacy 101 class for board members, and so he didn't know what to do. So complacency. Misguided motivations. This gets back to one of those duties, always thinking about the organization first and personal desires and preferences second. And so sometimes there could be what feels like a good motivation, but it's misguided. And an example here was a board member wanted to get a relative a job at the nonprofit organization who is out of work. And this person really was not qualified for the position, but the board member kind of exerted their power, so to speak, and the executive director felt pressured into hiring this person, and it didn't work. It didn't last a year, but that's a misguided motivation. And I'm just giving you one example for each pitfall. There are many, and so be keeping in mind your organization and are we stepping in this pitfall, or have we stepped in this pitfall in the past? Okay, let me do a few more of these. These are fun. I like these. Multiple voices. Boards speaking with multiple voices can be a pitfall. And what that means is, it doesn't mean multiple voices are bad in the context of a board meeting. I said earlier, it's good. You want dissent. You want different opinions. You want people to be able to say whatever they want to say. But when a vote's been taken and a decision's been made, at that point, the board speaks with one voice, and individual board members are bound by that collective decision. And it can get very messy and embarrassing sometimes when there's an issue with an organization and, you know, one board member says something to the news media about what really happened, and maybe the executive director says something else, and it gets a little messy. So the example I'm giving is I'm working with a foundation right now, and one of the board members was so enthusiastic about wanting to give money to a particular nonprofit that he all but promised them a 3-year, 6-figure grant. And then when that got back to the rest of the foundation board, they're like, whoa, wait, what? You went out and said what? On behalf of us, on behalf of the foundation? So he realized, all right, I did wrong, and that shouldn't ever happen again. Okay. A few more. Micromanaging. You've hired the executive director to run the organization. You need to trust him or her. You need to ask the right questions. You need to be looking at the right information. But other than that, you don't need to get into the weeds. Unless you're asked for your counsel because you're a Jungian analyst and you're on the board of the Jung Institute and staff have a question about, you know, a vacation that Jung and Freud took and you know the answer to it. So in that case, it's okay. I wouldn't consider that micromanaging. Limitless terms. This is when there aren't board terms and board members serve for a long, long time. And this often includes founders who just don't want to let go. And I've had client organizations where the founder was still on the board 30 years later. And it's not ideal. It's like if there's a stagnant pond, you want to introduce fresh water into the ecosystem and fresh oxygen. That's how it is with the board. Fresh board members bring fresh ideas and help boards get unstuck if they've been stuck in certain ways. So whether you've got term limits of 3 years or 10 years, the point is just to have term limits and adhere to them. Okay, we've got 4 more missteps, and then we can have a little final Q&A, and then I know Shelby wants to say a few things at the end. Lawless governance is a pitfall in terms of board members, I don't want to say turning a blind eye, but maybe wearing blinders and not paying enough attention to what the executive director or the CEO is doing at the organization and just trusting everything's going to get done. And boy, that's a form of complacency as well. So there are so many examples of this. The one I gave, and this happens more often than I wish it did, but to get through a financial crunch, a nonprofit executive director decided they didn't want to pay payroll taxes for 18 months. I wrote here, the board turned a blind eye. They didn't know about it, but should they have known about it? Should they have been paying attention? So they essentially were blind. I can think of 2 cases where that's happened. Another horrible situation, because lawless governance also has to do with making sure tax forms are turned in on time and, you know, paperwork's done. I know there's a hospice that the executive director kept not resubmitting the licensure to keep their hospice license. And so their hospice license was yanked entirely. And I can't believe it just happened in a few months. So the executive director obviously was ignoring this for a year, 2 years, 3 years, I don't know. But this hospice organization lost their hospice license. They no longer operate as a hospice. Instead, they turned to counseling people who have a hospice family member or friend. But that just happened inadvertently. That wasn't their intention. Not doing a board assessment is a pitfall. It's important to have boards look at how they're functioning as a body. What can they do to improve? What do our members need to learn about? Financial literacy, fundraising, public speaking, performance measures. And it also helps with the spirit and the accountability of a board to do this reflection as a body. And maybe you've experienced this. I hear this pretty often, that it's hard for board members to get people to show up. And if they do, they just kind of drink coffee or eat sandwiches, and people aren't energized, and committee chairs can't get people to come to committee meetings. And so not that a board assessment is a silver bullet, but it's one thing that does kind of just shake the tree a little bit and help people recognize, oh, I do have accountabilities. I need to pay attention to that. Kind of in the same light is looking at self-improvement. So what can I as a board member learn more about? How can I push myself? What more do I need to learn, either about the industry or about finance? And what kind of goals can I set for myself? So if I know I am really comfortable asking people for money, then gosh darn it, I should be the first to volunteer for the year-end call-a-thon, where we're going to call our best donors and ask them to keep us in mind this year for a year-end gift, and thank them for their support, and just push myself a little bit. So self-improvement is really important. And then finally, knotted purse strings. And what in this case, what it specifically refers to is board members and their role as ambassador not using their networks, not using their connections, not being out there representing the organization. And if board members aren't doing that, and that includes giving your own money, if that's not happening, why should anybody else out there get excited and care about the organization? So it's using your connections, it's using your links, it's helping to foster new relationships. And it is making a personal gift as well. And it doesn't matter how large it is, it's more of the symbolism of it. So those are 10 common pitfalls. I'm going to stop there for today. And if people would like, I'm happy to share these slides back out to the group, and you can take them back to your organization. But any comments or questions that people would like to share, maybe a challenge you're experiencing at your association, which I'll guarantee you somebody else is also experiencing, or a question about how to make a desirable change. So we'll just throw it open.
David, I do have one question that was put in the chat earlier, and then I'll let everyone else unmute and ask their questions. How does a board take the leap in culture from strategic planning to strategic practicing regularly?
Whoever asked that question, can you say a little bit more about that? What is it you're trying to get at?
So at our board meetings, we have a check-in as to what they've done on the strategic plan. That check-in is probably about a third of the board that does it. And then 2/3 aren't really engaged in the strategic plan portion of it. They know what the strategic plan is, but they're not really participating in pushing the strategic plan because they're kind of the old regime of the board. We do have a big turnover that's going to happen in the next 2 years with term limits. And so I think that will solve itself a little bit in that manner. But how do we get those old school board members engaged in being a little bit more responsive?
Well, an organization's culture always chews up anything in its path. So that's a challenging situation. And a lot of organizations experience that. The old guard, the new guard. The new guard wants to introduce innovation and change, and they have energy. And the old guard says, you know, it's been working fine for 30, 40 years, and we built a good machine, and there's no need to do anything different. So I just have a couple of thoughts. One, the strategic plan is for the whole organization, not just for this program area, that program area. So every board member has some stake in the strategic plan, even if they're not actively working on steps, action steps, and so forth. You can also model good behavior by encouraging that questions be asked, and that the 2/3 that aren't participating probe and push a little bit, and be loyal adversaries to the strategic planning folks, meaning it's not an aggressive inquisition, but questions that could spur some inquiry or some creativity. And sometimes it's time for board members to turn over, and it's just a new point in the organization's life cycle. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. Any other questions or comments? We have a few more minutes. Did any of this information resonate with you today? Are you thinking, oh my God, we're not doing any of this stuff? Or we're doing some of it pretty good, but...
Yeah, let me jump in here and say thank you, first of all. Everything that you have gone through reminds me of points that I have been aware of or heard mentioned, but you have pulled it together a very good way, which helps me to focus then in a more structured fashion on what we can be doing, what we should be doing. And particularly that the last comment about, or one of the latter comments about board members who are members in name only. I find that encouraging, and I will let my comments to the person I have in mind cook until I see that person again, and at the appropriate time I will say, looks like you don't have much time and energy for what we're doing here. But anyway, thanks for the presentation. It's really, really helpful.
You're welcome. And you know, we do a lot of board assessments with organizations, and sometimes board members who aren't pulling their weight know it and would like to find an exit, but they don't want to let the organization down. They feel guilty about possibly leaving, or they feel embarrassed. And so they just kind of languish. And a board assessment is one way of helping board members speak to what they did over the past year, what they want to do, what kind of time they want to give. And it helps create an exit ramp sometimes, because board members realize, oh, you know, at this point in my life, it's different than 20 years ago. This isn't necessarily the right fit anymore for me. Or the organization, other board members may recognize that about a board member and find a way to repot that person if they still have something meaningful to give. So that was a long way of saying sometimes people want to be let off the hook, and you can do it in a really kind and generous way that honors and values them, but also is loyal to the organization and what needs to get done.
And I see Mary has a hand up. Go ahead and unmute, Mary.
Sorry. I just want to comment on this last discussion, and I appreciate Boris's comment. I would like to add that I think that there's the problem you mentioned earlier of mission drift, where there's different visions of what is necessary within the organization to pursue. I think that's a problem that we have struggled with. And so that in some ways that winds up creating divisions on the board. So there's one group that wants to do it one way. Maybe it's the old guard versus the new guard, but the idea of mission drift really caught my attention. So I don't know if you want to comment about that.
Well, sometimes at those moments when there's a log jam and there's factionalism and there's kind of entrenched values and opinions, that's when we get asked to come in. And sometimes it's really, really helpful to have an outsider do the facilitation, do the mediation, and see how can we accommodate everybody's ideas and thoughts if that's possible, or how do we move ahead and move along and try to have the greatest consensus possible, even if that means one or two people might be disappointed. So the good news is, if you're really stuck right now, it's just a matter of time that you're going to be unstuck. The question is, do you want to have that be kind of an intentional unstuckness versus just things breaking and people just leaving en masse because they're so disgusted? And so it's kind of like managing that process. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Shelby, would you like the remaining 7 minutes to kind of wrap up and say what more you want to say?
Yeah, I'll leave it open. If anyone has any other questions, I just have a couple minutes at the end. So last call for questions, either place them in the chat or unmute, and then we'll wrap up.
I hope you found this interesting and there's something useful you can take away, just one nugget.
Getting lots of thumbs up, David.
Yeah, good. And I know, because I hear this from board members all the time, that I may have said something today that you've been saying for years. You've been saying it over and over and over, but it doesn't get heard. And sometimes, again, that's the function of a consultant. We can come in and say the same thing that's been said for a long, long time, and somehow it gets heard differently. So, yeah.
All right. So again, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Really
thank you,
enjoyed it.
David, for the very informative presentation. David's contact information is on the screen. We will share slides and a recording of the video as soon as we get it edited, and also include David's contact information in there. And just a little plug for our next session, which is on August 30th. We are dropping a link in the chat to register for that session. Looking forward to that. So please come back and join us then. And one last plug to follow us on social media.
And can I throw in one last thing? Angela was whispering in my ear to remind everyone who's on this, on the program today. I think we had 12 of our clients represented, which is wonderful, to please share the video with other members of your board. One of the challenges we have everyone's lists and contacts and such, but we want to be conscientious of the way that the information gets to your fellow board members. So would love to be able to be sure that other folks get a chance to not only listen to today's session, but also participate in next week's session as well.
And I encourage everybody to come to Sally's session, the next one. And you won't need to drink your coffee that day because she's a double shot of espresso and you're going to feel energized. So she knows what she's talking about. It's going to be a great session.
Yeah, awesome. And then please follow up with any questions or to connect with David or, any follow-ups that you guys are thinking about. Yeah. We appreciate everybody on the call. We appreciate our clients, our team members, our new friends. Thank you for spending a little time with us today.
Stay cool, everybody.